Chapter 16. Buster Knows Me Best. Finishing up work earlier than usual, I chose to take Buster for the walk I had promised during our initial visit to the churchyard. "How do you like it?" I inquired, standing at a breezy spot I frequently visited before the accident. My gaze always drifted towards that large property, wondering about the isolation from the world. Previously, it was just curiosity. Now, though, I felt a sense of contentment being on this side of the river. "Feels good, doesn't it?" I glanced around for Buster, only to smile at myself. While I had been searching for the church to the north, he had wandered down the hill next to me. Emerging from a cluster of trees, he trotted towards me with a stick too big for his size. "You can drop it by the van," I laughed, heading towards where I had parked. "But we'll have to leave it. Maybe try again tomorrow if it's sunny." The day I took Buster to the churchyard, imagining myself hiking my beloved hill felt like a far-off dream. It hadn't been simple, navigating the path from the bridge over the creek, then climbing to the ridge overlooking the lake. Yet it was another small victory, fueling my desire for greater adventures. By stretching my limitations, I was re-exploring the world through fresh eyes. I no longer felt the need to do everything solo, all thanks to Buster. Our return drive was peaceful, but tinged with sadness. Dropping Buster off always felt hard, despite knowing he belonged there. I couldn't shake the feeling of loss as I headed home. Sometimes, as I left, even Buster seemed to question why I was leaving. "Aren't we having fun?" I imagined him thinking. "Why end it now?" That afternoon, as I arrived home, Buster's owner met me by the fence. I greeted her and recounted the day's highlights. "He must be tired," I concluded. "That's great," she responded, her voice betraying deeper concerns. "Brandon, I need to tell you something." "What's going on?" I asked, sensing her anxiety. "We're moving." "What?" I stepped back, shocked. "To where?" "We're leaving," she stated, offering a regretful shrug. "New job, fresh start." "Well, congratulations," I told her. "That's wonderful news." Buster's owner gave me a look full of understanding. She didn't need to say anything. I knew what this meant for me. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice becoming more upbeat. "We have until the end of the month, though, so you guys have time to enjoy a proper farewell." That night, when Susie noticed my distress, I found it hard to explain my feelings. The shock of the situation had left me speechless. Just as I had found a dog that had deeply impacted my life, it appeared our bond was going to be cut short. "You still have a few weeks," she tried to comfort me. "Plus, Brandon, maybe you can adopt a dog of your own." "But there's no dog quite like Buster," I argued back. "He's one of a kind." The next day, it was business as usual with Buster by my side. On our way to work, I spoke to him like I always do, but this time I shared how much he truly meant to me. By the time we got there, I was fighting back tears. Having him there was bittersweet. It made me cherish our time together even more, knowing it was almost over. One day I decided to take Buster to the beach, where we both enjoyed an ice cream, his new favorite. I also discovered his love for swimming was as strong as his love for chasing sticks. During our first trip into the lake at Ennerdale, I momentarily panicked, thinking he mistook the water for solid ground. But seeing him paddle joyfully, I called him back reluctantly. After shaking off, soaking me in the process, he seemed to ask if life could get any better than a swim. I had to admit, not much topped that. "Nobody's going to be happy about a drenched dog," I noted, watching the time. Without a towel, I hoped a brisk walk by the water would dry him off. The thought of going back, knowing our days together were numbered, churned my stomach. I was convinced Buster had been my saving grace. I only hoped I had made his time outdoors enjoyable before he had to leave. Lost in these thoughts, I barely noticed the dock as we walked by it. I caught a glimpse of Buster sprinting back towards me, which was normal since he tended to run in big loops around me during our walks. But just after he dashed past me, There was the sound of heavy footsteps on wood, a brief pause, and then a loud splash. "Oh, come on, Buster!" When I finally turned to look at the dock, Buster was happily swimming past it, cutting through the water. "We could have done this tomorrow." He looked back at me while continuing to swim, then made his way back to the shore. As he got closer, I could see the pure happiness in his eyes, and my annoyance melted away into a smile. I stood at a distance as he climbed out of the lake and shook off his coat, then laughed when he sat down, looking at me expectantly. "Do you want to go off the dock again?" I asked, feeling the strain of the long day on my back. Still, I couldn't find a reason to refuse. I pulled out my phone. "At least let me get a picture this time." In the van, I had some cleaning cloths for work. I grabbed one that wasn't used for cleaning oil and tried to dry Buster as much as I could. But only a proper bath would get rid of the wet dog smell. "Try not to draw too much attention tonight," I told him as we walked through the gate. "I'll come get you early tomorrow, and you can come to my place for a shower, okay? Hey, Brandon, everything okay?" Buster's owner appeared from the house as I looked up. Buster went over to her, and she gently held his face, immediately noticing his condition and turning to me. "So," I started, "we took a walk by the lake." I only got that far, but it was clear from the way she softly reprimanded Buster that this was a familiar scene. "He does love to swim," she said, looking down at the drenched Labrador. "I'm sorry," I apologized. "It might be best to keep him away from any warm spots unless you want your whole place to smell like him." She glanced at Buster, then smiled at me. "He's a mess," she admitted. "But he's also tired and happy. I can't thank you enough, Brandon. He really enjoys being with you." "I'm going to miss him," I said, feeling suddenly choked up. Buster had already gone inside, likely knowing dinner was waiting, leaving me facing his owner. "This move," she mentioned, "is really unfortunate. You can't tag along. I'll be so swamped that Buster will need to adjust to spending more time by himself." I shoved my hands into my coat pockets, not really wanting to dive into a topic I was dreading, so I told her I had to head back home. "Taking care of a dog is a big responsibility," I managed to say as I walked away towards the van, "but I bet you'll manage somehow." As usual, Susie could tell just by my entrance how my day went. "You seem upset," she observed. "Difficult client?" "All my clients are wonderful," I replied as I hung my coat up. "It's about Buster." Susie gave me a moment before responding. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Even if they're moving away, it doesn't change what he means to you." I shared with her the conversation I had with Buster's owner by the gate, reflecting on how moving had impacted David and me. My career move had forced us to uproot our lives, and it was our beloved dog who suffered the most, left with kind neighbours as I worked endless hours. The guilt of his passing still weighed on me, I confessed to Susie. "I just wish Buster could stay with us. I can provide for him just as he does for me." Susie's response hung in the air for a moment. I looked at her, trying to fathom her suggestion. "You mean, ask if Buster could stay with us? Susie, I can't possibly do that." "Brandon," she calmly said, "what do you have to lose?" Chapter 17. A New Family Member. It took a few days for me to gather the bravery to speak to Buster's owner. Susie had sparked a small hope, and I didn't want to hinge everything on it. I had to brace myself for potential disappointment, because deep down, I felt this attempt might fail. During that period, I spent my time enjoying moments with Buster. He calmly waited for me during jobs, and afterwards, we'd go for walks. I always carried my phone camera, capturing Buster as he embraced his role as a dog model. Whether he was surveying the landscape from a hill, racing down a muddy trail, or leaping for a stick, capturing his spirit was a delight. I found that more people shared my affection for him. Each time I posted his pictures on my business social media, I watched the likes and shares steadily increase. I received positive comments about Buster and questions about the places we visited. It was surprising to see interest from far beyond our local area. Advertising my window installation business in unreachable locations seemed futile, yet it was thrilling to realize that others saw Buster's greatness too. We made regular trips back to the dock just earlier in the day so Buster had time to dry off. Watching him sprint and dive into the water always made me laugh. It was pure joy for him, and he would repeat the fun until it was time to go. I cherished every little adventure we had between jobs. Finally, one afternoon, after a walk with a scenic valley view, I readied myself to pose the question Susie had planted in my mind. Before approaching the yard, I wanted a moment alone with Buster. "Whatever happens," I told him, "know that you are loved, not just by me, but by everyone." Buster looked at me with a somber expression before turning towards the house. His owner appeared to welcome us, as usual. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the van. "Hello, Buster," she greeted at the gate, letting him through. "I hope he hasn't been any trouble." "Not at all," I replied, "though he's got a ways to go in his joinery apprenticeship." She chuckled, then invited me inside for tea. I instinctively declined, saying I needed to head back. As I spoke, a quiet voice inside scolded me for being so timid. I wanted to make my suggestion, but face to face, it felt pointless. "We have a moving date," she announced. "We're leaving in a week." "A week?" I was taken aback. "That soon?" "Yes, we're ready," she answered, then looked down at Buster. "Well, almost ready." "What's missing?" I asked, my head spinning from the news. Suddenly, I noticed a look of uncertainty on her face. "Is there anything I can help with?" "Brandon," she started, "I have something to ask, but you can totally say no and we'll drop it." She paused, then took a deep breath. "After our talk about the commitment of having a dog—" "Yes?" "When we move, would you like to keep Buster?" "Well, I should discuss it with my wife," I managed, fighting back tears. "I'll talk to her and get back to you tomorrow." That evening, once I had composed myself, I told Susie what had happened. She looked at me in astonishment. "What are you like?" she asked eventually. "You've always wanted this, and now you hesitate." "She caught me off guard," I protested. "So you left her waiting," Susie said with a reluctant smile. "What's stopping you from just saying yes?" "I wanted to check with you first," I explained. "I can't just bring Buster home without your okay." We sat down to dinner, but my appetite was gone. Ever since Booster's owner had floated the idea of keeping him, I was overwhelmed. I had always felt undeserving of happiness, a feeling that deepened after my accident. Buster had been a bright spot amidst the turmoil. With his owner's offer, it seemed like I could have a chance to keep that joy, but I was struggling to grasp it. "I know how much Buster means to you," Susie acknowledged. "Yeah, but I know you're not too fond of dogs," I replied. Susie nodded. "They're messy," she said. "I can't deal with dog hair, mud tracks, or barking." Her list was familiar, and as she spoke, I felt my hopes fading. "No need to say more," I cut in. "I'll let her know tomorrow." "Why wait?" Susie suggested, picking up her glass and gesturing for me to do the same. "Call her now. Tell her we'd be happy to have Buster. But you—" "I'll manage," she said, touching her glass to mine. "If it makes you happy, that's good enough for me." The next morning, I almost left Buster at home, worried I wouldn't be able to concentrate at work. But I needed to see him and talk to his owner face to face. I wanted to discuss everything thoroughly and reassure her that I would do all I could for Buster's well-being. I gathered my courage before getting out of the van, and I was glad I did. It all went smoothly. It felt right confirming to his owner that she was making a good decision. "I know this is tough," I said to her, "and it means everything to me that you understand." "He's going to love it," she replied, as Buster spun around, thrilled at the thought of getting into the van. "We'll miss him," she continued, "but it's the right thing for Buster." With the moving date decided, I got ready for Buster's arrival like a dad-to-be. I set up a sleeping area for him in my office at home. I bought a basket and a mat and searched our linen closet for old blankets and towels. I arranged a feeding area in the kitchen and started collecting balls and toys to keep him entertained. "He's not a puppy," Susie remarked one day when I came back from the pet store. "Isn't he 5 or 6 years old? He's probably past playing with toys." "A dog always stays young at heart," I replied, placing down a bag filled with chew toys. "I don't want him to get bored and cause trouble." "I'm just happy that Buster is getting you back on track," she said, laughing. "After all we've been through, it looks like you've been rescued by a Labrador." I was eager for his move. Each morning, as Buster hopped into the van, I'd tell him about his new home. I even took him there a few times to get used to the layout, size, and scent of the place. Buster was always well-mannered, almost too much so. I hoped for a bit more excitement from him, but I knew Susie wouldn't appreciate that. He just sniffed around politely and stayed out of trouble. But increasingly I noticed that behaving inconspicuously was getting harder for him when we were out. "Is that Buster?" The first time it happened, I was packing the van outside our home. Buster was next to me, checking out the back tires and waiting for me to finish up so we could head to the next site. "It is! Look, the internet dog! It's Buster!" I turned to see a woman with a stroller crossing the street towards us. She wasn't from our neighborhood, but the joy on her face made it clear she recognized one of us. "Hello," I said, just to be courteous, though I had never met her before. She came to a stop and crouched next to the stroller. The young child seated inside was gazing at Buster in awe. "This is the doggy from Mommy's phone," she explained, then looked up at me smiling. "Your window installation page," she clarified. "We adore your photos." "Thanks," I responded, both flattered and surprised that someone would spot a Labrador on the street like that. "You can pet him if you'd like. He's quite sociable." I looked at Buster. He glanced back and moved closer when I signalled. The toddler stretched out excitedly and gently touched his nose. Buster happily wagged his tail. "He's wonderful," the mother commented, getting back on her feet. "We view your photos daily. My daughter even asks to see them by herself now." "Really?" I replied, astonished. "Well, that's lovely of you to say. Thank you very much." "No, I should be thanking you," she insisted. "It's tough to leave the house with a little one. When she sleeps, I sit with a tea and browse pictures of Buster. It feels as though I'm out there with you. It means a lot." A short while later, after friendly words were shared, the young mother and her child continued on their way. Yet her words lingered with me throughout the day. Buster hadn't just transformed my life. His calm nature and enjoyment of the outdoors seemed to touch others as well. "You," I told him as we drove on later, "are truly unique." I had rolled down the window for Buster. He enjoyed sticking his nose into the breeze, and although he didn't look over, I noticed him glance my way. We were headed to our last job of the day, driving down a rural road after a game of fetch by a creek. When my phone lit up with Buster's owner's name, I stopped to answer on speakerphone. "There's a snag with the move," she said. "It might not go through after all." As she detailed the problem, I stared blankly past the van, feeling a deep unease, but I reassured her that I understood. She mentioned she'd stop by later to pick up Buster, and I asked her to update me, then hung up. In the quiet that followed, with Buster beside me, I held my phone in my lap. Suddenly, with a sigh like that of a man who had struggled to keep his head above water, I succumbed to my feelings. Chapter 18. Home is where the heart is. It was Susie who kept reminding me that all was not lost. The move hadn't been cancelled, but possibly delayed, and Buster's owner was simply being courteous by keeping me informed. That's how she framed it when I came home with eyes rimmed red from weeping. The news had undoubtedly come as a shock, even though I was hardwired to be prepared for the worst. What really surprised me, however, was how fragile I was, even thinking that Buster might not be mine. It made me realize just how central he had become to my life, and I worried what would happen to me if the plan for him to move in with us fell apart. "Just take each day as it comes," said Susie. "Enjoy your time together. Nothing can take away from that." As ever, my wife was right. I took Buster with me the next day on a drive across the fells to a customer who had specifically asked me to bring him along. When I arrived, the guy seemed not the least bit concerned about the job he'd asked me to do. Instead, when I rang the bell, he trooped his family out to the van in the drive and introduced them to the internet-famous dog. "It hasn't gone to his head yet," I joked behind them, but frankly, they weren't very interested in me or anything I had to say. It was something I chuckled about when we hit the road once more. While it was a nice surprise to find that Buster was earning so much attention, I quite enjoyed finding myself out of the spotlight. On several occasions, I had left customers petting Buster through the van window while I got on with fixing their locks. It helped to put me in a more positive frame of mind as we followed the road over the pass that led to Braithwaite. "The good news is that you can still remain as head of security if you stay," I told him, and then chuckled to myself. "In fact, I'm not sure the business would be where it is today without you." Winding our way back into Braithwaite, I came to recognize that there was no point stewing over something beyond my control. I felt helpless and desperately wanted Buster to join me, but even if that didn't happen, he would still be my colleague and companion when it came to walking the trails and hills. This whole question mark about whether or not he would live with me had made me realize just how dependent on him I had become, but nothing could change the bond we had formed. It was with this in mind that I steered the van into the parking spot outside his house. The emotional upheaval since the call had left me exhausted. I still hated saying goodbye to Buster each evening, but I was beginning to get my head around the fact that it was a small price to pay for us to be together through the day. "Brandon?" Stirring from my thoughts at a tap on my window, I turned to see Buster's owner. Then she held up a letter. I had no idea what it was about, but the smile on her face told me enough. "The move." Why? Because I had just crossed the threshold with a Labrador at my side, and this was his home now. "Buster," I said, barely able to contain my delight. "Here is where it all begins." My eyes were raw from crying, which I had kept in check until we were in the van and on our way. It was tough, no doubt, for his owner and I kept my distance as she said goodbye. Of course, I left her with an open invitation to visit any time, and promised I would keep her updated as he settled in. I really did appreciate what a tough decision this must have been for her, but we both had Buster's welfare at heart. Just then, as Buster sniffed around the hallway, I wondered if he knew what had happened. Judging by his eye contact with me, he certainly seemed aware that I was in an emotional state that day. "Susie," I called up the stairs. "There's someone here who'd like to see you." I had to call for her again before she heard me. "Is it a customer?" she asked, before appearing at the top of the stairs. "Oh!" Buster trotted to the foot of the stairs, his tail wagging, and then greeted Susie as she skipped down to greet him. "Isn't it wonderful?" I said. "I keep having to pinch myself." Susie had crouched down beside Buster. I watched her lean forward and sniff his coat. "He could do with a wash," she said. "Are you offering?" "Not in my salon," she laughed. "He's your responsibility." "I know," I said proudly, "and I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. It means everything to me." I should be thanking Buster. Susie stood back, considering me with a fond smile. "He's brought you home to me." Buster padded back to me just then. He sat at my feet and leaned on me, which he had taken to doing whenever I started crying. This time I chuckled to myself as I sought to regain my composure. "All this weeping," I said, and wiped my eyes. "It started when I met him." "Well, he's cheaper than a therapist," said Susie, stepping back up the stairs. "I need to get back to work," she told me. and you need to call the dog groomer and make an appointment." We had a busy day ahead of us, and I was glad that I had decided to keep it free from bookings. That morning, the dog groomer gave Buster a proper wash and brush up. After taking him for a walk with no mud or water in sight, we then paid a visit to the vet. Buster passed the health check, as well as taking his jabs like a trooper. I just wanted to start afresh, tick every box, and leave nothing to chance. With all the paperwork to hand, the final act was to get him microchipped. I watched the vet register him alongside my name and address, and decided there and then that I had done enough crying for a while. Naturally, my composure didn't last long. The next time I needed a moment happened soon after we got home that afternoon. Buster had come back to the house with me on quite a few occasions in the run-up to this day, so he was familiar with the place. On this occasion, however, I didn't head for the door around 4 o'clock in order to take him back. Instead, he sat on his bed while I did some paperwork. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, he looked at me expectantly, as if to say, "Shouldn't we be getting off soon?" Then, as the time approached when we would usually be leaving, he took himself to the front door. "Buster, you can relax," I told him. "This is home now, and you must be hungry." I had supper ready for him. I'd already prepared his bowl on the counter, which I set down beside his water in what would become his little corner of the kitchen floor. Afterwards, we went for a walk just to stretch our legs. It was getting chilly when I came back, and so I put the fire on. I don't think Buster had ever seen one before, but he liked the heat. With Susie and I in our seats, he lay down in front of it for a while. I watched him doze, but never quite drop his guard. "Bedtime could be interesting," said Susie as we prepared to turn in ourselves. "I'll take care of him," I said, bracing myself for a long night. "You go ahead." For a while after Susie had gone up, I stayed downstairs beside the fire with Buster and just stroked him. I still couldn't believe that he was really here and that I was now fully responsible for his welfare. "It's me and you, Buster. From this day forward, we're going to get out and make the most of every day." By now, the heat from the fire had helped Buster to relax and bask. He stretched and groaned happily. I patted his flank. It was time for bed. After a quick visit to the garden, I led Buster upstairs to my office. His basket was waiting for him, and once he had settled, I dropped a blanket over him. I had prepared myself for Buster to be a handful, but when I wished him good night and retreated to the door, he didn't follow me. He just offered me that soulful look of his that never stops melting my heart, and then rested his chin on the edge of his basket. "Sleep well," I whispered. "This is the start of our new life together. We're going to build the business and climb new heights. I want to take you across the fells and beyond, because every time we reach a summit together, it feels like we can still go further." Slowly, so as not to disturb him or unsettle my back, I rose to my feet. "Maybe one day, if I'm strong enough, we'll tackle a mountain I've always wanted to climb. Right now, Buster, it's a distant dream, but with you at my side, I'll get there. I know it." A moment after I clicked the door shut, I heard a small whimper. I stayed quite still, ready to go back in again, should Buster become distressed. I stayed as still as I could, hoping he didn't realize I was listening, and even held my breath. On hearing a sigh and the sound of a tired Labrador settling in for the night, I crept away and went to bed, and from there on out, I never looked back. Chapter 19. Every Step is Up. Just over a year after Buster moved in with me, we took a week off work, packed the van, and headed north of the border. Hiking to the top of Snowdon was still a very big deal for me. Even though I had made walking with Buster a central part of my life, I continued to live with chronic pain. The only thing that had really improved was my attitude towards it. I had learned to manage the most severe episodes and change my mindset so I no longer felt so trapped. A jolt to my back or misplaced footing would still stop me in my tracks on a regular basis, but I was no longer alone in dealing with it. Even at the worst moments, I could always reach out for Buster, knowing that he would be there for me. He had never let me down in all the time that I had known him, and in return, I aimed to give him the best life that I could. The way I saw things, Buster had saved me. I could never repay him for that, but became increasingly aware that others saw the qualities in him that had pulled me back from the brink. Throughout the year, I continued to post pictures of my head of security on my site. It was clear to me that his appeal now went way beyond my customer base as a window fitter, because I would get comments from people all around the world. Sometimes it was just a compliment about his expression or the scenery, but every now and then I would receive a direct message. Despite the sender being someone I had never met before, often they would open up their heart about issues affecting their lives before thanking Buster for making it more bearable. Every time I felt deeply touched that anyone should reach out in this way, and also responsible somehow, to make sure that Buster connected with anyone who needed him. The surest way to do this, I decided, was to keep on sharing pictures on my site that I hoped would brighten lives. Sure, I could post a picture of the van with my contact details on the side, but the fact remained, people came to see a Labrador with a sheer lust for life. "Are you ready, Buster? On 3? I stood with my phone camera in one hand and a stick in the other. Naturally, Buster's attention was fixed solely on the stick. I would have to be quick as soon as I launched it into the air for him. He would move with lightning speed and live up to his name as a Labrador by catching the stick as it sailed through the air. 2, 1, here we go. What I hoped to capture, as both dog and projectile came together, was the building in the background. I always tried to frame my pictures with something interesting behind Buster. In general, I made the most of my natural surroundings, but on this occasion we were here for work, and I had spotted an opportunity for a great shot from the drive. Business was going well. I received a steady stream of call-outs that kept Buster and me on the road, with plenty of time for walks in between jobs. As well as helping customers who had locked themselves out of their homes, businesses, or cars, I often found myself invited to become a key holder for unattended properties. The Lake District is dotted with holiday homes. Sometimes, if the owner wasn't local, they simply wanted to know that someone was watching over their chalet. Aggressive. He didn't have that in his bones. What I could do, I realized, was teach him how to mouse. The first time I received a call, on a dark and windswept night, I just hoped that Buster wouldn't let me down. "I'm on my way," I told the operator from the monitoring center, who had just reported an intruder alarm at one of the organization's properties. I knew the place well. It was popular with tourists, set in sprawling grounds, and contained a labyrinth of rooms across several floors and wings. If anyone had broken in, I thought to myself, it would be easy to hide from me. This was a job for my head of security. "Come on, Buster," I whispered, on cracking open the door to my office. We might have a rodent problem. The drive took less than 15 minutes. The road out from Braithwaite was littered with leaves and dead wood that had been blown from the treetops. On pulling into the grounds, the van's headlights floated across the building's facade in front of us. At any point, if I felt at all unsafe, I knew that I could call the police. That was part of the procedure. Essentially, my role was to give the emergency services access to the property. With Buster at my side, however, I didn't feel the need to summon help just yet. Instead, on pulling up, I led him to the main door, unlocked it with the master key, and then crouched down to make sure he had my full attention. "You know what to do," I whispered, braced to open the door. "Buster, find the mouse." It was a cue that caused his ears to prick. We had been practicing this command at every opportunity. It was effectively a game of hide-and-seek, using balls and sticks or anything that seized his attention. Then it was just a question of exciting him as he hunted it down until he couldn't contain his bark any longer. As ever, when it comes to training golden Labradors, it had proved to be immensely fun and swiftly rewarding. Now I only had to say the word, and Buster sparked into life. "Go, Buster, go!" With a gruff woof, as if to acknowledge that he understood, Buster rushed through the door as I opened it. I rose to my feet, so relieved to hear him barking as he tore through the ground floor. If there was a prowler present, this would not be a welcome sound. Without a doubt, Buster's bark was worse than his bite, which frankly was non-existent, but he sounded like he meant business. "Find me the mouse, Buster. Where's the mouse?" I switched on the lights in the grand lobby, which immediately made the place less sinister. Buster tore up the sweeping staircase, making such a racket had I been creeping around on the rob. I'd already be out on the landing with my hands in the air. He continued to ricochet from one room to another, moving so fast it was hard to keep track of how much of the building he had covered. All I knew was that his presence gave me the confidence to begin sweeping the rooms. I started with the ground floor, still heartened to hear him barking as he thundered around upstairs. It was only when I inspected one of the rooms on that level, however, that I discovered the cause of the alert. "There!" Booster joined me as I directed the torch beam at the open window. The curtain flapped like a loose tongue in the gale and I could feel the rain spots from across the room. A quick check at the ledge told me nobody could have scaled in. The fact that the glass was intact and the window arm snug on its pin suggested it had been left open by accident. I closed the window before offering Buster a treat from my pocket as a reward for his efforts. "As my head of security," I told him, "it's fair to say you have passed your annual review with flying colours." A year into my new life as a joiner, I could look back on my old career with no sense of loss. I didn't miss the office-bound environment, nor the endless drive to meet and exceed sales targets, although I had thrived on it at the time. Now, I considered myself to be a different person, and that was someone who could truly say that they were comfortable with life at last. I didn't need to ride a performance road bike 60 miles to feel at peace with the world around me and appreciative of everything it had to offer. I simply had to watch my dog spinning with excitement at the prospect of a walk. Buster was important to me for all sorts of reasons, but as I moved on from those lost years locked inside my own home, I recognized something that could still bring me to tears. His constant companionship, drive and spirit had given me this chance at a second life. Before the accident, had anyone suggested I would be thriving in a new job that often saw me on call through the night, I would say they were mad. When my phone rang at 3 a.m, however, I didn't surface from sleep with a sense of dread. It was exciting. A chance to get out and about on an adventure with Buster as if we were the only two living souls. I loved it, and the fact that Buster adored it too just made the whole experience more rewarding. It could be a strange existence, and sometimes I'd be ready for bed as dawn rose, but with careful management of my time, it worked out just fine. When Buster first moved in, I worried about Susie. She had never shared her home with any kind of pet, and I knew from experience that a golden Labrador could charge indoors after a long and muddy walk before I had even got my boots off. Buster was different, however. Sure, if there was a puddle, he would rush to crash into it, but when it mattered, he listened to me. I talked to him constantly, which must have helped him tune into my voice, but it served a useful purpose around my wife when it came to acclimatizing her to a dog's life. He would wait in the van until I invited him to hop out and let me towel him down on the step before heading into the house. In return, Buster had an uncanny ability to pick up on my thoughts and feelings. If I was tired or in pain on a walk, he would stay closer to me than usual, and when I needed him to thrash through a stately home after dark in full voice, he did so without hesitation. The connection between us was extraordinary, and I wasn't alone in remarking upon it. Susie recognized what Buster meant to me, as did friends and neighbors. Even people I had never met before were moved to comment on what a special relationship we shared. At the same time, as Buster drew more likes and comments to my business page on my website, I decided it was time he had a site of his own. Chapter 20, Buster. At the Lakes. Before I switched careers to become a window installer, confined to the indoors, my engagement with social media was almost non-existent. I'd glanced at the internet, but all it seemed to host was an endless parade of how splendid everyone else's lives were. It felt detached from reality. Everything appeared glossy and perfect, far removed from any posts I could relate to back then. If someone had shared they'd spent their whole day zoned out in front of the TV contemplating dark thoughts, that would have struck a chord with me. That's mainly why I kept my distance until my business venture began. My primary goal was to attract customers. I recognized that having a website could elevate my visibility locally. Biddling is essential in everyone's daily routine, though often overlooked. My aspiration was to be the go-to professional they'd call during a rainstorm, who would later be praised for my prompt and efficient service in getting them sheltered. The moment I uploaded a photo of Buster, I hadn't anticipated the journey it would embark us on. Sure, snapshots of my dog were a hit and garnered attention for my work, but I was aware people didn't visit my page just to jot down my contact. Bearing in mind my initial skepticism of the web, where it seemed everyone showcased an ideal version of themselves, I decided to create a page solely for Buster focused on genuine content. He was a dog that couldn't pretend to be anything but his true self. Whether he was lively and silly, passionate, reliable, or loyally devoted, Buster epitomized living life to its fullest, and if sharing his adventures could brighten someone's day without making them feel inadequate, then his page was achieving its purpose. Ready to go live? I proposed to Buster as I wrapped up the setup for his community page. I named it Booster out in the Lake District for two reasons. Firstly, it was exactly what you'd expect, and secondly, it amused me. I wasn't here to market anything, which alleviated any pressure. It was purely for enjoyment. Investing in a digital camera seemed worthwhile since owning Buster had reignited my passion for photography. I kicked off by posting a recent photo of him and shared it on my window installation page to alert my followers. "Well done," I announced after a final click on the keyboard. Buster peered at me from his bed. Although I was pretty sure he didn't grasp the concept of having his own online page, I sensed he was happy to see me relaxed and smiling. I got up from my desk, twirled my chair, and leaned down for a big hug with him. "Don't get too down if nobody notices it," I told him. "But hey, if it brings a smile to even one person, that's success." I made it my goal to share a photo every day in the following weeks. Sometimes I'd switch things up with videos of Buster hopping through the underbrush or plunging into the water after a stick. Many of my clients took a liking to Buster's online adventures, and it felt good not having to use it to plug my window installation work. That part of my life was doing well on its own thanks to people spreading the word, so this could just be about enjoying time with my dog. Each evening, after closing up shop, I checked the page and noticed our followers and their interactions gradually increasing. Folks were sharing our posts, attracting even more attention. I'd let Buster take a sniff at the screen and show him, "Look at this," as I read aloud a comment where someone turned a peaceful-looking photo of Buster into their phone's wallpaper. "You're touching hearts." A few weeks later, we embarked on a scenic walk through the woods on a hillside above the road leading into Braithwaite. We crossed over a stream and followed a trail blanketed with pine needles. On our way, a young couple with a Labrador recognized Buster and stopped us. "Is he yours?" the woman asked. I paused, wondering if Buster had caused some trouble while out of my sight. "The Buster?" she went on, bending down to pet him. Surprised, I replied, "Yes," thinking she must be an acquaintance I'd forgotten. "Maybe one of Susie's clients." I suddenly felt embarrassed for not remembering her. Just then, her partner chimed in. "We adore your photos." "She sends them to her mum," the woman added, standing up. "She's all alone, so you really can't stop posting now, or she'll miss it." "Message received loud and clear," I responded, touched by their words. "And give your mum Buster's and my best." The woman's face lit up, and after sharing a look with her partner, she asked, "Would you mind if Buster posed for a photo with me? It would brighten my mum's day." "Absolutely," I said, taking his phone so they could both join Buster in the frame. Buster was more than happy to comply, and their smiles were infectious. They tried to include their Labrador in another picture, but truthfully he was more interested in exploring the scent of tree barks. Our brief interaction wouldn't last long, but the memory lingered with me throughout the day. "Thank you so much," the young lady expressed as we prepared to go separate ways. "My mum's going to be so surprised when we tell her we've actually met Buster." "It's our pleasure," I replied, wishing them a great continuation of their journey. As we started to part, she called back, needing to know one more thing. "My mum will surely ask," she mentioned, "what's your name?" Being the centre of attention has never been my cup of tea. I've always preferred to contribute from behind the scenes. As time went on, with Buster gaining fame both online and in real life, I was perfectly happy staying out of the spotlight. Susie found this quite amusing, especially during our regular lunches at the pub. There, curious patrons would cautiously approach, inquiring if the Labrador by our side was the one they've seen online. "And this is Brandon," Susie would introduce, although by that time all eyes were on Buster. It never bothered me. In fact, I took pride in how much joy my dog could bring others. Reflecting on when I first encountered Buster, all alone in a yard, just yearning for some companionship, it's astounding to think about the bond we'd developed. Initially, he wasn't trained, nor did I teach him many tricks, aside from how to catch mice on command and deterrent for potential burglars in the Lake District. Somehow, he just naturally clicked with me. One day, after dropping Susie off and tackling a challenging job at a holiday home, we headed for the Northern Fell. Throughout the day, large clouds drifted by, and at sunset, I thought it'd be the perfect chance to take a splendid photo of Buster on the summit's bench. As expected, upon our arrival, the sunset bathed the sky in a fiery glow. Time was of the essence before the light disappeared. "Buster," I called as we neared the bench with a view over Braithwaite and the magnificent lake. "Let's see you do your thing." Buster jumped onto the bench and sat, looking out towards the fading light and the red-stained horizon. The sunset illuminated his coat beautifully, especially his tan spots turning to a rich shade of brown. However, when it came to photography, it was his ears that made the shot special. All it took was the right angle, calling his name to make him look my way, and I captured a flawless picture of my faithful companion, in his element. "That's lovely," Susie commented when I displayed the photos I had captured. "Another one for Buster's website?" I was carefully reviewing each photo when she approached me in the living room. Buster was nestled in his bed by my chair, softly snoring away. After snapping several shots, I aimed to pick out the very best. "Actually, this one's for a contest," I revealed to her. "I'll send a few, though I'm not holding my breath. But you never know." Earlier that week, I had grabbed a country magazine from the local shop. Being a fan of all things nature, I always tuned into nature documentaries with keen interest. The magazine was quite the read, and the call for submissions of a beloved outdoor photo caught my eye, so I decided to participate. I showed Susie the magazine's page, then the photo I was considering. "There's a bit of mud on his paw," she observed, examining the picture closely. "No worries," I assured her with a smile, aware of how Susie likes things spotless. I gave him a good wash before we came inside. Susie then looked at the Labrador sleeping soundly next to me. It had been yet another fulfilling day. Buster appeared joyfully tired, much like how I felt. "One of my clients asked about him today," she mentioned. "She follows his website." "It's incredible how much of an impact a small dog like Buster can have," I said. As I spoke, Susie made a face. "Oh, Brandon!" she exclaimed, waving her hand in front of her nose. Right then, the scent hit me too. "Sorry," I apologized for Buster. "He's just had his dinner." Chapter 21. Nature's Wrath. As autumn arrived, ominous clouds draped themselves over the hills and descended upon Braithwaite. The summer had been extraordinarily warm and calm, leaving us to wonder if it would ever conclude. Right when Buster and I were eager for the crisp evening strolls, the skies opened up. Initially, the thirsty earth drank up the rainfall. The gaps in our preferred hiking trails healed swiftly, soon giving way to sticky mud. Being frequently out and about, I noticed these shifts abruptly, which dampened my spirits somewhat. Rough weather usually didn't bother me. I had a penchant for it from my mountain biking days. But this storm was unyielding. It rained continuously, sparing us only brief moments of sunshine. After a week, Buster and I had to forgo some of our beloved paths. While Buster seemed delighted by the muck, returning to the van plastered in mud turned into a hassle. Consequently, we resorted to walking along the lake's edge. Buster still got drenched, but at least I could dry his towel easily without having to sneak it past Susie into the laundry. 2 weeks into the rainstorm, every small creek and rivulet transformed into vigorous streams. New watercourses emerged, making the sheer volume of rainfall impossible to ignore as it surged down every slope. Nearly a month later, the clouds finally scattered, revealing the sun. The terrain was thoroughly soaked. Stepping off the pathway meant sinking into the mire. The land was drenched through, even at higher elevations, signaling a slow recovery ahead. It was odd to see folks stepping outside without immediately reaching for an umbrella or dashing towards cover. Sunlight reflected off puddles on the streets, and water sang as it rushed through the drains. Observing the river, now bulging and swift from the mountain runoff, I realized we had narrowly avoided disaster. Before minor floods had affected some homes during intense rains, interestingly, this situation opened up a new avenue for my business. I encountered residential flood barriers fit for doorways, aligning well with my work. As the rains persisted, I found myself installing these defenses in homes near the river and in vacation homes nestled in vulnerable areas, keeping me actively engaged. I was relieved when the sunny days came back, since they made our walks much more enjoyable. A week after the rain stopped, Buster and I headed south to Borrowdale. We went on a hike along the ridge with views of the lake. Looking at the crowded islands, I could tell the lake was full. The morning was windy and unsettled, but we didn't let that stop us from getting some fresh air. It was only when I saw the clouds getting darker, captivated by the scene. I know you're a swimmer, but this is a different beast. Turning back, we took the higher road toward the town, feeling the gravity of the situation. It was just Buster and me, no sign of anyone else. The night was pitch black, rain lashed at us, and leaves whirled in the turmoil. This was no longer about adventure, it was a life-or-death journey. I made sure Buster was secure and carefully drove through another flooded section. The entire area was submerged, and with Braithwaite located in a low-lying area, I dreaded what awaited. I was confident that Susie would be all right. Our house was away from the river. Yet the river ran through the centre, under a bridge and into the lake, placing countless homes in jeopardy, a thought that unsettled me. "Let's see if we can lend a hand, Buster," I proposed as we made our way into the town. The water raced down the road, guiding us. What was usually a quick trip now took over an hour. Around 3, I stopped by to check on Susie, finding her up and waiting. "Oh, you're back," she sighed with relief as we entered. "I just came for my rain gear," I explained. "I've got door flood barriers in the van. I need to start helping out as soon as possible." "Are you taking Buster with you?" He circled her legs, eager for a sip from his dish. I'd just fetched my rain boots from beneath the coat stand when I noticed my spouse's face etched with worry. "With Buster by my side, we're going to be just fine," I assured her. Creeping through the flooded streets, we headed towards the lower part of town. Several streets resembled rivers, the water spilling onto the sidewalks. We saw neighbours fortifying their homes. I stopped the car at the street corner, and for hours I installed every flood barrier I had in the trunk around homes at imminent risk of flooding. As the first light appeared, remembering Buster's patience in the car, I took him to the park for a walk. The river runs along one edge of it. The sight and sound of the water rushing toward the bridge was intimidating. Braithwaite had faced floods before, leading to the erection of high barriers to safeguard the road. But seeing the violent flow now, I doubted their effectiveness. The rain persisted, and water from the hills was yet to arrive fully. "Buster," I spoke as he walked by me, "our job isn't done yet." The morning was spent aiding Braithwaite's inhabitants brace for what was coming. Alongside friends, neighbours, and acquaintances I'd never before engaged with, I moved furniture upstairs and laid down sandbags. All the while we watched the river closely. It flowed threateningly close to the park, prompting the police to close the nearby path. Buster stayed in the car, allowing me to help more efficiently. With the window down, he attracted lots of kids, serving as a delightful distraction for them as their parents endeavoured to save their homes from the flood. Occasionally, I'd let him out, and he'd be immediately enveloped by curious youngsters loving the attention. "Such a trooper," a mom commented. "He's so peaceful, isn't he?" "Let's hope we can remain as calm as Buster," I replied, eyeing the river nervously. By noon, Buster and I went back home for a bite. Though weary, a grim anticipation hung over the town. The flood was imminent, only its timing was unknown. An hour later, Buster and I were back out, seeing how else we could assist, this time driving towards the road by the lakeside. I found the bridge blocked off by the police. The flood defences, meant to hold back water, were overwhelmed by the vast flow. Emergency vehicle lights flashed, casting blue glimmers, while folks hurried about, seemingly having left their homes in a scramble. Buster and I stood among them, watching the floodwaters invade the bridge approach. Soon, the police extended the blockade as the roadway began to vanish beneath the rising waters. The primary concern now was public safety, as the overflowing river transformed adjacent streets into raging streams. The surge had dislodged manhole covers, turning the streets into dangerous waterways filled with debris and hazardous currents. Yet, this disaster brought our community closer, sparking a collective effort to aid and salvage what was possible. The deluge, fed by mountain runoff, overwhelmed our town, its effects persisting into the night and beyond. Over the next few days, Buster and I pitched in, him more than myself. While I helped residents save their possessions, he kept company with those who couldn't partake due to age, frailty, or shock. Recognizing the risks, I adorned him with a vibrant red dog jacket, marking him somewhat as an emergency responder. Buster offered solace, approaching those in distress, providing a momentary escape from their troubles. I'd often find people huddled by him, seeking comfort through embrace or a shared tear. His mere presence offered a semblance of solace, mirroring the companionship he'd always given me, making me incredibly proud. As the floodwaters receded, our community faced the aftermath, over 300 homes devastated. Through it all, Buster remained a constant support, even earning admiration from the electricians working to restore power and a mention in the local newspaper. The ordeal had tested our town, but through Buster's gentle spirit, we were reminded of the enduring hope amidst adversity.